Hi everyone, very nice to have you all here again with us on our Meet the Creator interview for July 2024. I can't quite believe that it's nearly the summer holidays already, but hooray. But today I'm going to be interviewing Ashley Hickson-Lovance about his amazing new YA novel, Wild East. So very much welcome indeed, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor, a real delight. And so it's very warm, but we'll bring that energy to this chat, I'm sure. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It is a bit warm. If my hair's blowing around, guys, that's just because it's far too warm without the fan. So, as we do normally, we'd be absolutely delighted, Ashley, if you don't mind reading us an excerpt first, please.
Sure, yeah, very happy to do that. It seems fitting that I will read from the beginning, if that's okay. From the prologue, I'll just read a couple of pages to give listeners a flavour of what Wild East is about and how it's written. Obviously, we'll talk about that later on. But here we go. Context-wise, all you need to know is that the main character is Ronnie. He's on the bus with his best friend Maz. He's on the top deck of a bus, and for some reason, there are some other boys on this same bus starting trouble. Yes, it's a bit unpleasant for them. A glance as sharp as a shard of broken glass. His dark eyes slicing souls open with crystal clear precision. On the top deck of this 43 bus, we've become targets locked in his vision. What are you looking at? He says. His words are all jagged and pointy, loaded like a strap and hanging heavy, weighty enough for every other passenger to hear. We didn't know that we were looking at him. Not really. Maz and I, no more than a little peep if we were, certainly didn't mean to cause offence. We've just been chilling, in all honesty, chatting and joking around, doing stupid impressions of our teachers and stuff, but this guy sat at the very back is getting all riled up. Oi, did you not hear me? He says, louder than before, his voice all strained and spiky. What you looking at? He seems to be addressing me now only. He sat with this other guy, quieter but looks just as menacing. They're both like 16, 17, 18 at a stretch, maybe. Either way, just a few years older than us. But unlike Maz and me, they're not in school uniform. I think they've got it twisted because I know I've never seen either of them before. You see, where I come from, you remember every spot, scratch or scar of someone's face. So this must be a case of mistaken identity. It has to be. The two of them sit sprawled across the 5 seats at the back, and we're sat half turned to them, Maz on one side of the aisle, me on the other, just a few rows in front on the top deck of this double-decker bus, the current scene of this unprovoked but not totally unexpected verbal attack. You see, when you live in London, you can't ever let your guard down just like that. Me and Maz, best friends since year 7, same form, class, school, football team. We always got this bus home together, took it basically every day from our school in Archway, past Holloway and Highbury, along City Road, through Islington and into Hackney. Maz is mad good at art, wants to do it next year for GCSE. He's a guaranteed grade 9, easily one of the best in the year, maybe even the whole school. He's good at doing realistic portraits of people and landscapes of the city. But this picture here is not looking pretty.
Wonderful. Do you know, I could just sit here and listen to you read the rest of it, really, but I suppose we better not. I suppose I best ask you some questions. So that first section that you just read us leads to a very upsetting event, and that is the trigger for Ronnie and his mum to moving to Norwich.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write such a gritty book, and where's that coming from?
The type of writer that I'm not terribly imaginative as a writer. A lot of my writing very much draws on like lived experiences, anecdotes and stories, or things that I've sort of witnessed firsthand. And unfortunately, what happened to Maz in the prologue of Wild East is very similar to what happened to a friend of mine back in 2007. I grew up in East London, in Hackney, and I had a friend called Nas, who lost his life, um, in very tragic circumstances back in 2007 in a situation that was very similar to Maz. So what I did was that I used the experience, the emotion of the experience, and the trauma of the experience, and it took 15, 16 years. But I've tried to try to make sense of what happened by putting a version of it as the prologue in Wild East. It's not exactly the same. Names have changed, of course, dates have changed, and some of the details are changed, but the heart of what happened to my friend back in 2007, I've tried to put into the prologue of Wild East. In terms of sort of the general grittiness, so to speak, I quite like exploring hard-hitting themes. So we've got grief and we've got sort of county lines, and we've got all sorts going on, which is can be quite potentially quite triggering for a reader. But I wanted it overall. I wanted Wild East to be a joyous book. I really did. So I wanted there to be a balance of, yes, these things happen. Unfortunately, teenagers do lose their lives. Unfortunately, we do have an undercurrent of drug dealing and drug selling, and but we do have other things to counteract that as well. And that's something that I wanted to do with Wild East, have that juxtaposition of good and bad.
Mm. Which you've certainly achieved. I mean, my overriding feeling at the end of the book is that it's a very hopeful book, actually. That's the whole idea that I took from it. It was very hopeful, towards the end. So when, as you say, you were using your own real life events, did you find writing that prologue very hard? Was it a cathartic experience for you?
It was hard. Yeah, it was hard. I'll be honest. It was hard um, because of it was a very unpleasant experience. It reminded me and took me back to when I was that age, and I was terrified. I lived in London, and all I wanted to do was get a decent enough grade so I could leave London for university. That's all that kept me going, because I didn't want to be caught slipping in different areas. I didn't want to be sort of wrongly targeted. I didn't want to be, I just didn't want to be in those circles. So I worked really hard during my A levels to just try and get out of London, and writing the beginning of Wild East took me back to young Ashley, who was just scared. Really, he was scared. He was really,
Yeah.
really scared, and that was hard. But I'll be honest, since I've been reading the prologue in sort of schools and the odd events and whatnot, I've actually I don't know. I've sort of, the experience for me has changed now. I kind of see it as a positive in many ways, because I'm thinking about Nas, my friend. So
Yeah.
it's like when I'm reading the prologue, and like I said, that it's slightly different in terms of what happened, but the feeling of Nas is still in there. And so sometimes I read it and I smile, even though I know it's quite a tragic beginning. But I'm thinking about my friend, and I feel like
Yeah.
through my words, hopefully a version of him still lives on.
That's absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Now, you did mention just now, of course, there are references to county lines in the book. And what I was going to ask you was, because I understand what that means, but not everybody will understand what that means. So could you just explain to our listeners what that term actually means?
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually. Yeah, because it is sometimes used, and it's if you don't know, you don't know, right? And unfortunately, though, it is on the rise, and especially in sort of smaller towns or cities, also villages. Basically, it's this idea that um, bigger bigger sort of organized crime groups slash gangs are selling drugs, let's say from bigger cities like London or Birmingham or Manchester, but they use local teenagers, often very vulnerable, not always boys as well, it can be girls as well, to sell these hardcore drugs in those areas, in those more rural areas. So these drugs are coming from the big cities, the Manchesters, the Birminghams, the Londons, etc. But they're being transported and sold by young boys and girls in these more rural places, or sort of smaller towns and cities. And they are the bottom of the chain. They are, when they are the ones that will get stopped by their police, and their lives will be ruined if they're carrying these drugs. And that temptation exists because these older, more experienced gang members lure them in with money, They lure them in with trainers and clothes that perhaps they can't afford themselves, and they lure them in with a sense of care and love that isn't really there. That isn't really there. And it's unfortunately on the rise, and it can get very messy. It can become very territorial, and it can become very dangerous. And lots of teenage boys and teenage girls have lost their lives because of
Mm.
their involvement in county lines. This idea of selling drugs, in very dangerous places sometimes. But yeah, often from the bigger cities, but in the more sort of rural towns and cities. And once you're in, it's really hard to get out. Once you start selling or once you start holding packages of drugs or whatever it might be, it's really, really hard to get out.
Mm.
They keep you in with like I said, the best trainers, the best coats, the best whatever it is, because they know it's really hard to afford that in the cost of living crisis. And yeah, it's a real tragedy, and often we don't know it happens, in the local
No.
park or in the local street corner, and it does happen, and it's often the most sort of vulnerable members of our school community,
Mm.
students who might have needs, students who don't have the best home lives, students who maybe incredibly poor, So yeah, it's something that I'm very passionate about in terms of addressing, and I was doing it in a sort of light touch, creative way in Wild East, but generally as a person, it's something that I am very passionate about addressing.
Well, I think that's a very important point that you made, that it's not just young men
Yeah,
and it is girls that are getting pulled in
absolutely.
as well. And I think we do fall into the trap of thinking it is mainly young men, but it's not, just young men. It is young girls that are getting involved as well.
Absolutely, and often these gang members, they use young girls because they think the police will never look at them, or the
Yeah.
institution will never look at them because they're girls and they will never be involved. But actually, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is there are loads of very vulnerable girls who are, get sucked in themselves, being told to look after weapons and drugs because they can't have them. These gang members can't have them on themselves because they'll get arrested in trouble. So yeah, no, it's unfortunately it's on the rise. And I've got teacher friends who live in Kent, and that they see it very regularly. And I live in Norwich. Not as bad here, but it does exist, and unfortunately, some lives have been lost here. But I've also worked in Ipswich, and it's a big problem there as well. So it's something that as a society, that we have to keep an eye on for sure.
Okay, to move on to more hopeful things. We started quite dark. With the blurring, what I really loved the blurring of lyrics and poetry in the book. And that's something that your main character finds quite difficult, doesn't he, Ronnie, at first? Because he doesn't think, lyrics are not poetry, and he doesn't like poetry, but he likes writing lyrics. And was that something that you wanted to get across, particularly to young people?
Yeah, the idea that, I mean, I get it. There is this idea that poetry isn't cool. Poetry is boring and
Yeah.
you know, inaccessible and really hard to decipher. And I really get it. It's really interesting with Wildies because the way that it's written the way that it looks on the page aesthetically, it's got short lines, it's got lots of white space, a few images in there as well. I did that deliberately because I wanted to appeal to what we call reluctant readers, right?
Yeah.
I wanted our teenage boys and girls who perhaps don't love reading to go, oh, this looks interesting. Oh, look, there's a picture of an afro comb. Oh, look, there's a word search. Oh, look, there's not many words, etc. But
Yeah.
actually, sometimes that puts people off because it looks like poetry, and students think,
Yeah.
"Oh God, poetry's hard." And I get that, because when you do your GCSE anthologies, your Moon on the Tides, your love and relationships, your power and conflict, it's a bit like, oh, you've got to analyze every single word. And I used to be an English teacher, so I know it. This isn't a criticism. I know what we have to do, but so yeah, I really wanted to show readers that actually, poetry is just like song lyrics, and there is the relationship is much closer than you think, and there is the same alliteration and sibilance and puns and juxtapositions, etc., that you see in poetry in song lyrics.
Yeah.
Grime music, drill music, hip hop music, pop music. It all has the same features that you will see when we analyze, those little features that we do in English. So that's what I wanted to do. Absolutely, I think you've got it right. Blurring those distinctions. I'm a type of writer who doesn't believe in labels of prose and poetry and song lyrics. For me, it's just words.
Absolutely. You mentioned there Ronnie's mum, and I think she's an amazing character. I absolutely loved her. I really did.
But yeah, no, a lot of love for Ronnie's mum. A bit like all my writing, I draw on real people, and obviously I drew on a bit of my mum as well. You know, my mum was a single parent mum in Hackney, East London, and very hardworking. Wanted the best for me. I just didn't want to let her down ever, you know, as a human. And yeah, no, there's a bit of mum, but not all of it is my mum, definitely not. You know, it's just a little flavor of my mum, but also just some amazing mums that I've worked with as a teacher, some amazing mums that I've come across in my it's sort of my day-to-day life, really. So yeah.
She's a very strong character. I also enjoyed the shout outs to other novels that were sprinkled through the book. And each time it happened, I was like, oh, yeah, I've read that. I really like that. So, what I wanted to ask, and hopefully, what I think is great about that is that hopefully it will encourage young people that haven't perhaps read them to go away and seek them out and read them as well, which is amazing. Are there any particular authors or poets that you feel have particularly influenced you?
Yes, I think it's a super question. I mean, you know, the reason why I did that is because they have been influential to me, and that I think one of them that does come up quite a bit is Dean Atter's The Black Flamingo.
Yeah.
It was written in verse, which gave it this lovely fluidity. It felt like such a breezy read, even though some of the themes are quite hard hitting. So that was one of the ones that I really loved. It was just, yeah, it was, you know, I absolutely loved it. I also love the work of Louisa Reed, both her YA stuff, but also she's written a few adult novels as well. So yeah, you know, oh yeah, and of course Manjeet Mann's The Crossing. So yeah, you know, what I do is whenever I'm writing something and I'm having a bit of self-doubt about whether this project's any good, whether my writing's any good, I keep a small pile of books nearby, and I sort of just have a little dip in and go, okay, right, that's how it's done. You know, just have a read a good sentence or a good stanza or a good paragraph and go, okay, right, oof, I like that. And then I'll get back to work. And I think, yeah, Manjeet Mann, Louisa Reed, Dean Atter, those are my favorite YA sort of writers. And then in terms of adult, Max Porter, Zadie Smith, those are probably two of my sort of contemporary favorites, actually.
I think that's really interesting what you just said about Black Flamingo, because it does seem like an easy read, and yet it has got some very hard hitting subject matter in it. And I find that myself when I'm reading a verse novel, I have to stop. And you suddenly get to a stage where you think, hold on a minute, what have I just read? Because it's easy to read down the page. You know, you almost the impact doesn't catch up with you till a couple of pages later, and you suddenly think, what the heck? And you know, and I was the same with your prologue. I was the same with that. I read that and then thought, no, I'm going to go back and read it again because I hadn't fully taken in the impact of it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
So, are we allowed to ask what you're working on next?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. So I am working on a second YA book.
Excellent.
It will be a new YA project, but it will be written in verse. I can admit it will be written in verse. So
oh well, that's all right then.
Yeah, so there's a little nugget there. I will say, as a sort of another little teaser, the main character is another a young black boy. You know, I love writing. I think because I had when I was reading as a teenager, I didn't see it that often. You know, there were writers like Benjamin Zephaniah and Alex Wheatle doing amazing things when I was growing up, without a doubt. It did exist. Sometimes writers say, well, we didn't have anything. That's not quite true for me. I did have amazing black male writers to read, but not many of them, not many of them at all. So that's why I'm passionate about putting young black male experience at the center for me. You know, even in my adult work, you know, I have my main characters are often black men. So yeah, for the new book, for the second YA, the main character is another young black boy.
Thank you so much for coming along to talk to us today, and thanks for the teasers about the next one. We'll be looking out for that with pleasure.
Amazing.
And I hope that you get lots of nice reviews from the kids, because it certainly deserves to.
Bev, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
You're
I'm
very welcome.
so grateful to you, and yeah, wish you well. Thank you for having me on.